Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second day of the ICRI conference. We have been delaying this by 5 minutes. It's early morning, and I could still see people in the lobby, so I was delaying it by 5 minutes. My name is Michael ARENTOFT. I'm heading the Open Science Unit in the European Commission, and it's really a pleasure for me to chair this session in ICRI. I have with me 4 distinguished panelists, and it's not an all-male panel, because we will have with us online also a female participant. But before I introduce the panelists, I would like to set the context of this session, which has many reasons for being important in the current context of how research is being performed, how the different challenges are being tackled. So starting from the top, we see more and more that both the societal challenges, but also the business challenges that we are tackling with research are becoming more and more interconnected, intertwined, and indeed international or global in nature. We also see that the questions that researchers would like to tackle are becoming more and more interdisciplinary, more and more multidisciplinary. And as a result of both of these, we see a research process that is increasingly data intensive. And this is exactly the focus of this session, but also a series of sessions that we have throughout this conference on data and the digitalization of research and science. Research infrastructures, of course, is a very important, has a very important role to play in this context, both as producers of data and as users of data. So with this session, we would like to tackle a number of important questions in this context. First of all, being a conference which focuses on research infrastructures, how can research infrastructures best serve researchers and research organizations in doing this process of increasingly data-intensive research, tackling the societal challenges and the business challenges. So what can research infrastructures do so that researchers have access to, so that they can reuse data, tools, infrastructures in their daily research? How can research infrastructures help so that researchers can more easily share, more easily collaborate with teams across the world? Secondly, of course, research infrastructures are deployed in a local setting, in a regional setting, in a national setting, but as I just said, the data cuts across, the challenges cuts across internationally. So a key theme also of the session is how can research infrastructures be interconnected globally. And when I talk about connecting research infrastructures globally, there are many, many challenges. Of course, you have the technological challenges, but you also have many, many non-technological barriers or challenges to tackle. And they go all the way from legal challenges in terms of compliance with the different legal frameworks, or at least compatibility between the different legal frameworks, to also research security challenges. And you have, of course, also operational or governance, some would call them, governance challenges, in particular in terms of the criteria that are used for accessing research infrastructures and using research infrastructures. So typically we know about research infrastructures that allocate time slots in terms of scientific excellence. But if we're talking about doing research for important societal or economic challenges, of course, then the criteria would sometimes have to adapt also to that in terms of the importance of the research for solving global societal challenges. And the final question that we would like to tackle in the session are research infrastructures and digitalization. And when I say digitalization, it's both in terms of the own digitalization of research infrastructures, in terms of the access to them, in terms of the equipment in the research infrastructures in terms of using e-infrastructures, and of course also in terms of the output data from the research infrastructures. But when I say digitalization, it is also about how research infrastructures are used, such as for making, for instance, digital twins. And talking about digital twins, this is a good moment to introduce the first speaker in the panel, who is Thomas GEENEN. He is the Technology Partnership Lead for Destination Earth at the European Centre for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts. Thomas will talk about opportunities and challenges exactly for making this digital twin of the Earth. Please, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And good morning, everybody. And good to see that so many people made it through the cold, this cold morning in Brno. I would like to talk about Destination Earth, our planet's digital twin. But first, I would like to say a few words about ECMWF. So ECMWF is an intergovernmental organization established in 1975. So we are an operational organization, so we deliver medium-range weather forecasts to our member states. We also operate 2 Copernicus services, and now we're also embarking on Destination Earth, together with ESA and EUMETSAT. So Destination Earth is an initiative that is being run by these 2 partners, as I said before. So ESA is responsible for the core service platform, the platform where users actually interact with the Destination Earth. EUMETSAT is responsible for the data lake to basically give access to the different data sources that we need for Destination Earth. And ECMWF is responsible for the actual digital twins and for what we call the digital twin engine. And I will spend quite some time on explaining what a digital twin engine is. On top of that, we also will provide the first 2 thematic digital twins, the one on climate adaptation and the one for extreme events. Destination Earth is an initiative that will run for somewhere between 7 and 10 years and is divided up into phases. We're currently running phase 1 that will end towards the summer of 2024, and by that time we should be able to demonstrate capabilities at scale of these digital twins. Now, what is a digital twin? Very quick slide on that one. Digital twins are used in many different areas. The basic idea behind this is that you have an asset, either physical or digital, and you have a digital counterpart of that one. You should be able to gather data and information from your asset that you're building a digital twin from, and at the same time have simulation capabilities to run scenarios and have a better understanding of how that asset functions. So for the Earth, we do have a lot of sensor data, a lot of observational data to use in that context, and we also have very sophisticated numerical models to combine those 2 to be able to run scenarios. So we can continuously simulate and observe our asset, in this case the Earth. For Destination Earth, on top of that, what's very important to build a technical user face to allow for technical interaction with those models. So you're not running the model itself, but you basically have an interface towards those models, toward a digital twin that allow you to basically ask specific questions to the digital twin and get answers from it. And that will allow you to execute what we call scenario testing, what-if scenario testing, for both scientific theory but also for policies. Now, the digital twin engine, we see that as, you could also see like a gaming engine. Right? So it gives you a lot of components, a lot of sort of building blocks to develop, build, deploy, operate, and interact with the digital twin. So what's really important is there will be a lot of components that build this digital twin engine, and we will use them. We will have like an opt-in model for that. So you, when you develop your digital twin, you will be able to pick and choose from these components to operate with them, and it will help you to more easily develop them, but also to operate them and deploy them and provide them to your users. So these are the 6 main components that we identify for the digital twin engine. So the first one, obviously, is the simulation capabilities, right? So in the context of Destination Earth, we will provide better simulations and provide more realistic models on a global scale, also on a regional scale, but also on a local scale. So at those scales that are important for people in their day-to-day life. So you want to understand what the impact is on a crop field, or for a city, or for a village, or for a specific small region that you live in. And obviously we want to have these models to be able to use them in the context of these adaptation and mitigation scenarios. So for that, we're also working on better ways of combining all observations and all the simulations that we have, not only of the Earth itself, but also downstream applications in the area of food, water, energy, health, to support actual action scenarios. What's really important as well, as I mentioned before, is this interaction with the digital twin. So it's not just running a better simulation, it's also about how you can interact with those simulations, right? A second important component is, obviously, these simulations are very resource intensive, so we need to be able to use all the computational power that we can get. And we will run the Destination Earth on the pre-exascale Euro-HPC systems in Europe, being Lumi from CSC in Finland, Leonardo from Cinica in Italy, and Mare Nostrum 5 from BSC. And soon it will also be a real exascale system in Germany, and we'll also use that one. For us, it's really important that these Euro-HPC systems are getting more and more modular. So for digital twins, you not only need high-performance computing capabilities, but you also need high-performance storage, and you also need cloud stacks. And we see that these Euro-HPC systems, since they're getting more and more modular, are really suited for this specific task. And it also allows us to move more towards like a DevOps style of deploying our services. So for digital twins, the development will be really quick, and we want to be able to push developments really quickly, much quicker than we normally do in numerical weather forecast. And for that, we want to move towards a more DevOps style, like a more cloud-native style of developing and deploying and operating these models. And a cloud stack and a cloud-native environment close or on to these Euro-HPC systems will help us a lot for that. Obviously, machine learning is really important for us. We see that in a lot of different components inside Destination Earth. Obviously, the observations, we use them for uncertainty qualifications in the observation before we feed them into the simulation model. In the simulation model themselves, we use them to speed up the simulations by, for instance, using machine learning to emulate certain physics and not really simulating the physics themselves, but using machine learning models to replace them. We use them for data fusion and for uncertainty qualifications. If you look more downstreams, we also use it for data compression, obviously, because the amount of data that will stream from those digital twins is immense, and we need to compress them. And on the downstream application side, obviously, we will have completely data-driven machine learning applications that will simulate certain aspects. Now, on the data handling pipeline, you have the digital twins running on a Euro-HPC systems. We see that as an edge environment where the data is being produced, consumed, and also we run the simulation, so we interact with the data. We will have a cloud stack sitting next to the Euro-HPC systems to be able to interact with those streams, to interact with the simulations. So the digital twins will stream data while they're running and move that towards applications that will consume that data. We will store a selected part of that data, not all of that data, to this cloud stack to be able to operate on it and to run, for instance, machine learning applications. And only a very small fraction will we move away from that, mainly used to interact with the digital twins. So the idea is not that the digital twin is just a gigantic pile of data, we'll stream data to and people consume the data. You'll be consuming the information that the digital twin provides. And that data is being used internally for the digital twin. Right? We also will be storing checkpoint data, so that data that is not being stored can be reproduced later on. So the checkpoints of the simulation should be able to rerun certain simulations and recreate certain data in case you actually need it. Right? So that is in the context also of reproducibility. So we should be able to reproduce the simulations. That doesn't mean we're going to store all the data to be able to reproduce it, but we're also only going to store snapshot data so we can rerun simulations. And then you're talking about orders of magnitude less data that you're actually going to store compared to storing the full output of the simulation. So interface with digital twin is really important for us. So we want to provide an ecosystem where many digital twins will be able to interact with each other, right? So say you are have a digital twin of a snail population somewhere in the Czech Republic, and you think that this climate information is going to be relevant for you. That digital twin should be able to interact with other digital twins to get information and be able to run scenarios that will give information to that specific digital twin to operate on, right? So that whole ecosystem is for us really important, and what it means is that we have to expose a lot of these components and the interfaces to those components as APIs that other digital twins can consume, right? Talking about other digital twins, so there's obviously Horizon Europe initiatives, DTGeo, Intertwin, BioDT, Iliad, the Ocean Digital Twin. We also have a similar initiative like Destination Earth for the ocean, where it's also run by an intergovernmental organization, DT Ocean by Mercator. So that landscape is growing and evolving, and we want to facilitate that. If you zoom in a little bit more, I think the picture here is that these building blocks that I talked about, you have them on all these different levels, right? So you have them on the highest level, but if you zoom in deeper into the digital twin engine, you will discover more and more of these building blocks. So these are, for instance, the building blocks that we will have to actually interact with the data stream coming out of those digital twin simulations. And you can see that here you will have downstream applications running on your cloud stack, directly interacting with the data stream that comes from these digital twins. And for us, it's really important that we also facilitate the interaction and the interface on that level. Talking about these building blocks, so this is basically to summarize that picture. You have the building blocks for the capabilities, so the simulation, data assimilation, the observations. You have the building blocks for your digital continuum. Those you can combine into building digital twins. On the right-hand side, you have the different building blocks to write applications for the impact sectors. So for instance, for energy, health, biodiversity, and so on. And together, feeding back into each other, so also the data that comes from these applications can feed back into the digital twins that are running on the left-hand side. That again will allow you to provide an environment where you can continuously simulate and continuously observe the Earth and interact with it and run scenarios. And the technical interface to do that, that is one of the key points of a digital twin. And that again will allow to do this scientific theory and adaptation scenarios by policymakers. And that was all I had to say. I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Extremely interesting. Also reaching out to other areas of application. So not only weather forecasting, but climate change, biodiversity, oceans research, and explaining the interactions between them. I was looking if we had any questions online, and I don't see any. We can, of course, also take any quick questions on Thomas's presentation directly from this room, if anyone. There is, yes, one. There will be a microphone. It's standing right in front of you. Please.
Hello, good morning. My name is José Luis Martinez. I'm coming from on behalf of the Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation. But I have a question, maybe it's collateral effect. But I see in this society goes to the digital transformation and all this heavy, huge data and communication and so on. I have two aspects that I don't know where it's come from. First, I will say is education. I mean, people have to be educated for that. So, of course, it's not your domain, I will say, but I think I'm missing this kind of aspect. But the second one, who I really would like to concentrate, and it's my question, is where the energy will come for that? Because I read some, let's say, forecasts that really in the future, with everything connected and interchange and calculation and storage of the data, with the present situation, maybe 40% or even more, let's say in 10 years of the energy, will be devoted to that.
Right.
So where is the parallel planning about how to produce this energy, and how to distribute this energy, who arrive to every place in order to get that? Because otherwise, I mean, it's maybe collateral and very basic, not around that, but it's really...
Right. You're part of the problem in that sense. No, I mean, there's two angles to that one. The first is like, we have to really invest in making these high-performance computing more energy efficient, and people do that. For instance, if you look at Lumi from CSC, that's a very energy efficient supercomputer. We also have to think about like strategies on storing data. Indeed, if we store everything, we can just keep building data centers and just storing a lot of data. So that's not the idea. So also what I explained there, the strategy is to not store the data, but to be able to reconstruct the data, right? So you save a lot on the energy that you need to keep the data. And the other one is also, we also should not overestimate the amount of data that's being produced and that is needed for these high-performance computing. Yes, it takes energy, but you talk about 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt. A typical wind turbine already generates 5, 6 megawatts. So it's also not, you're not talking about that you have to build a nuclear power plant to power those HPC systems. But yes, it's a concern, and we're working both on energy saving and on, yeah, basically using less compute and less storage.
Thank you, Thomas. I think we have time if there's one more question from the floor. Yes, please. Either you can take my microphone or this one coming.
Yes, just maybe it's complementary to the previous question, energy, etc. And actually it's also about flows of data. No, what about how critical is the connectivity factor in all that that scheme?
So that depends a little bit on the digital twin. So you can imagine that for a digital twin for climate change adaptation, there's less time criticality, but for instance, a digital twin on extreme events is extremely time critical. Right, so there's a storm approaching, then the faster the better. So therefore we also put like a cloud stack very close to the HPC system and make sure that that connectivity is as good as possible. And then the information that flows out of it is little. So you talk to your digital twin, you need a little bit of information flow between you and the digital twin, but the internal data flow should be close together. Right? That's how we solve that problem.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much. We will move on to the next speaker, who will be our online speaker. So I hope the connection will work. I'm looking at the technicians because we will have online, I guess from Sweden, Hanifeh KHAYYERI, who is the Vice President of Computer Science at the RISE Research Institute of Sweden. Hanifeh, very good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hanifeh will tell us about the Swedish experience with e-infrastructures, and in particular, focusing also on the cooperation at the national, regional, or Scandinavian, if you like, European and international levels. Hanifeh, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to be here with you, so thanks to the organizers for making this possible. It's a bit awkward to be online because I can't actually see your faces that I'm talking to, but I hope you can hear me properly at least. And I hope the technique will work. I just thought before I start, I'd give you a very, very brief background of my perspective, because this, of course, changes the way I view the world. And I've been working at a public funding agency for many years, focusing on e-infrastructure, where we've been working on international collaboration. And today I work at a research institute where I'm much, much closer to the industry's use and development and involvement in developing RIs, which means that my perspective of research infrastructure is, of course, policy, governance, and funding. Although I used research infrastructures when I was a researcher, this is my perspective today. And as the chair said, I've been asked to talk to you about the experiences from e-infrastructure collaboration in Sweden. So I just thought I'd give you a very brief overview of the culture we have in Scandinavia. And as you know, we're a group of very small countries, and Sweden is large in area, but we're quite small in terms of population, which means that we kind of rely on collaboration all the time. Although we are similar in culture, when we start collaborating, we realize that we're quite different in terms of governance, actually, and sometimes so different that it's very difficult to benchmark and compare one Scandinavian country to another Scandinavian country. But at the same time, because there's a willingness and the policies in place, we can collaborate and we can get along. We also have limited amount of resources in these smaller countries, and it's not that our governments don't spend a certain percentage of our GDP on research. They do. They're quite good at that internationally. But because we're a small country, it doesn't become a big, large of funding in terms of cash to spend. So we have to collaborate and get critical mass before we can do something big, such as big science infrastructures, for example. We also have a very, very long bottom-up culture, like long history of bottom-up culture. It's very much driven by the researcher needs, which also means that we rarely see political, in terms of like, it's not people, elected persons that decide on how to invest on research infrastructure. It's very much need-driven research in Sweden. So this is when I want to flip to the next slide and it doesn't work. Oh. All right, great. So just to give you a few examples on how we collaborate on different levels on the infrastructure, it's on absolutely all levels. We collaborate even on national level, where, for example, in HPC, the universities get together and collaborate on what kind of HPC system we should have. At the same time, the same goes for sensitive data analysis and registry and biobanks. And there, for example, when it comes to sensitive data, it's interesting because it's difficult to collaborate because of the regulations by sharing the data. But what we do instead is that we point at a stakeholder and say, okay, you are the research infrastructure, you're responsible to share this data in a fair way, or make it visible. It kind of becomes a metadata infrastructure. And then the data owners or producers, they actually make their data visible on this site. So in that sense, you share or make data, you share fair data, you collaborate on a different level. And then you make this metadata catalog open so that you get usage of this open data across different research areas. We also collaborate, of course, on the Nordic level. This is one of our favorite places to collaborate on. And it's, again, on HPC. We tried to do a HPC system together many, many years ago, but failed. But then later on, we came back and did LUMI together, and that's fantastic. And I think perhaps one of the success factors with LUMI is that it wasn't just Nordic. It's much bigger than the Nordic countries. I think it's 10 countries that are involved in the LUMI infrastructure, and it's probably one of the reasons we could actually pull it through. But we also collaborate on networks. So, for example, we have our research network provider at national level, and then we get all of them together on the Nordic level and have something called Nordernet, which is the Nordic network provider collaboration. And then Nordernet, in turn, is a member of the GEENEN infrastructure. So it's many, many different layers of collaboration. And of course, the international level, we are members of many, many international infrastructures where we collaborate. But here, of course, the key collaborations are also not only like in terms of HPC and etc., but the portals, the standards that we put in the European Open Science Cloud when it comes to data and interoperability will be key in how we can collaborate on an international level in the future. So some of the lessons learned and best practices, and I had to think hard here to come up with some kind of invariants that you can take to different scenarios, because each country is very different. But I think the biggest lesson is you have to build on your strengths and you have to see what you have in your country. We have a very long culture of bottom-up, which means that it's also difficult. It comes with its challenges. You can't really drive change by just putting a big bag of money somewhere and let people gravitate towards it. That doesn't always work. You have to make sure you have the researchers with you. You have convinced them that we need this type of change, because it usually has to come with them. And to be able to do that, especially when it comes to challenges like open data, for example, or sharing data, we need to have the policy and the structures for collaboration in place. You can't underestimate how important that is. I think it goes without saying that trust is key. If we don't have the trust between partners that want to collaborate, it's just not going to work. And also something that we rarely talk about, the culture of that it's okay to fail. We rarely talk about failure when it comes to research infrastructure, but I think it's important to highlight that, yes, we do fail. Sometimes we try to collaborate, for example, about the HPC in the Nordic countries for many years ago, and we failed, and it's okay. You just kind of, you regroup, you come back, and you try again, because things change. So I thought I'd close with some very concrete examples of when research infrastructures really helped to tackle the societal challenges. And of course, one of the first examples is the corona pandemic. I was in the European Open Science Cloud Governing Board when the corona pandemic broke out. And I think it was fascinating to see how the European Commission and all the EU member states, they really mobilized all their efforts, funding, resources, personnel, etc., to try to solve the crisis by sharing research data as soon as and as best as possible. So what we did was that we set up a COVID-19 data portal that you can go on and see. It's still online. And through this portal, we could share our data. And in Sweden, we started off as a national portal that we then linked to the European one or the international one. And of course, as always, some data is difficult to share internationally because of regulation. But we were able to make the data still visible on a national level. So if you had access to it on a national level, you could actually see the Swedish data and work with the data. So I think this was a great example of when the research infrastructures could actually engage and help solving this crisis very rapidly. I'm happy also to hear about the question on energy efficiency. This is, I kind of wanted to talk to you from a different perspective, because I think you will hear a lot of research infrastructure talks during this conference. And here is a technological infrastructure that takes a different approach. So yes, research infrastructures, especially data e-infrastructures, research infrastructures and their data centers, yes, they take a lot of energy, but there are technology infrastructures to make sure to help these kind of data centers to reduce their carbon footprint. And we have one of them at Ruiz, for example. So it's not the data that tackles the societal challenges, but it's the research, the development of the infrastructure that tackles the societal challenge. And here you can actually optimize your data center so that it becomes green. And with green, I don't necessarily mean that you can grow vegetables on it, but we have that kind of infrastructure as well, where on the side of the data center, you can harvest the heat that comes from the compute and grow vegetables and etc. And that's the test bed that we have in Sweden, in the north of Sweden. But essentially, you can reduce your energy consumption significantly in these data centers. And I think it's very important to, roll that kind of thinking out in all our research infrastructures. But it's quite difficult also when it comes to construction of research infrastructures, because we do it in such a intricate collaborative way. And here, when you want to make your data center, optimize your data center, you need to have a close collaboration with the suppliers. So we need to kind of come up with new ways of collaboration here, I think. Finally, I want to talk to you about cybersecurity, and this is an area that has received very little attention, I think, and we're just scratching the surface. Because when we digitize our society, we actually increase the vulnerabilities in our society, and our data and our research infrastructures are of protectional value, so we need to protect them from attacks. And we have a very long way here to go. And cybersecurity is not just a topic itself, research topic itself, but there are cybersecurity research infrastructures that are there for everyone to use and to try to, you know, test their system. Does it work? And do research on their system as well. Does it work? Are we hacker-proof? And for example, again, in Sweden, we have an infrastructure, many of them, but one of them where you can build a digital twin of your entire system, every single computer, even if you want to see if your system is hacker-proof or not. But I think also we have a long way to go, because cybersecurity is not only just for the entire research infrastructure, it can also be for part of a device that you're building into your research. So we have a very long way to go before we are secure by design in these type of research infrastructures. So I kind of want to highlight this as one of my final speaking points. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Hanifeh, for joining us. We have time for a couple of questions. Again, I don't see any online, so we'll be happy to take also questions from the room. Yes, please, there's one, and the microphone is coming.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Masa from the OECD. So I have a question about in your presentation. You mentioned there are 3 layers of the data sharing in the national level and the international level and the Scandinavian level. So in that sense, are there any difference of the player which provides the data, and how can we? I mean, it is a much more policy side question, but how can we incentivize these kind of the player to sharing the data? So that's my question.
So yes, there are differences in terms of when and how we can share data. So nationally, it's generally easier because the regulations are quite clear on how to share data. It's not limited actually to Sweden. You can get the data internationally as well, but I think it's just that people internationally don't know how to request the data. Because Sweden is a very open country. So I think if you just know about the process, it's about getting the information really, you can receive the data. But it's still on the level that it's quite old-fashioned, where you kind of have to request the data and then someone has to check if you're granted the data before they can give you the data. But we have, this kind of infrastructures when you upload the data that you're not allowed to share outside the country, and then in this infrastructure that is nationally, you can do your compute and analysis, etc., harvest your results, and then publish your results, etc., and the data stays in this area. So that's a national experience, but this type of thing doesn't really exist on an international level. It doesn't exist in the Nordics or in the European. However, you do have something similar when it comes to sensitive data called RIKEN, which is also part of the bioinformatics group, or an Elixir, where they have areas, for example, for computing, where they share data for the compute, so to say, before they do the analysis. It's mainly national though, so the service is still provided nationally, although international people can have access. When it comes to incentives on how to make people share, I think collaboration is key. I think people need to realize that if you share your data with me and I share with you, it becomes better. Instead of me keeping my data, I can produce better results, faster results if I use someone's data. If I have access to the results, that I can see what other people have done before I design my experiment, for example. So I think we kind of need to continue being ambassadors of how excellent it is to share data so that people can see the benefits of it. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's one more question here.
Well, precisely, thank you. Just to that last comment about the sharing the data and opening up the data, but you also mentioned about the problematic connected to regulation that could be an impediment precisely to share the data. How do you see that? You say it's easy to share at national level, but I think the challenges are obviously go beyond national borders. So how do you see, how critical do you see that point?
I think it's very critical, actually. If we are going to come to a place where we are a more open research society and work with open research data, we have to find ways of collaborating and sharing our data. I think there are many different ideas on how to incentivize researchers, and it's, for example, instead of H-index, you can have an openness index, for example. But we know that these kind of markers usually, when people are creative, they use it in a different way instead of what it's intended to do. So I would be very careful with having kind of an openness index. But I think it's about, you know, pushing for change. Regulation takes a long time to do, both on European level and on what do you call it, national level. But we could work with frameworks, we could work with collaboration to get things started and to be able to demonstrate examples and convince politicians and policymakers that this needs to be done. So let's start there. Let's start with a framework within an area that we really want to collaborate on and share our data and show what we can do together.
Thank you so much, Dr. KHAYYERI. Thank you, Hanifeh, for joining us from Sweden. The next speaker is Dr. Tshiamo MOTSHEGWA, who is a computer scientist at the University of Botswana. And he's also the inaugural director of the African Open Science Platform. Tshiamo will talk to us about the data challenges and the digital challenges for science and for research infrastructures in Africa. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for promising that you give me latitude to spend as much time as I want, given that I've traveled halfway across the world, 24 hours precise to come here. I think the topic is wide enough to allow me to delve deeper and share some of the thoughts that we have in the continent. And there's an opportunity for us to engage the continent to make the necessary strides to join the rest of the world in terms of advancing our science enterprise to be fit for purpose in the 21st century. I think the last questions that were asked to the speaker were quite pertinent. I think she did her best to try to answer them. There is a lot of issues to be unpacked, and data is just one of them. The issues of incentives, quite important, particularly in the environments, including in universities, to change how we think about career progression, for example. Why do we as researchers need to think about sharing our data before we even publish, for example? What is it about our universities that incentivizes us to do research? And these are issues that are also tackled in other fora. I believe that there is a session going on right now regarding, for example, the Global Open Science Cloud. And indeed, I think last week there was a launch of the Global Open Science Cloud International Program Office in China. So I'm going to try to share with you what we are trying to do in the continent regarding some of these issues. Notwithstanding that when you join people on a journey without not knowing where they are going, you are in danger of not knowing when they've arrived. So it's very, very important for the continent to also think about these issues as we go forward. I always put this slide, and I think it's profound. It shows the scale and the size of the continent and the diversity therein and the opportunities and challenges. I think there was the word geopolitics yesterday. I think this takes it to a next level. I think everybody would agree that Africa is a continent full of potential and is a giant that needs to be tickled to wake up. And I think research infrastructures can assist in such. The potential and the challenges in the continent are multifaceted. They are interlinked. And indeed, they transcend those national boundaries that we talked about and cannot be addressed by one country or a single government. And I think Africa recognizes that we do have a responsibility in the grand challenges, including climate change. There were very, very good discussions yesterday regarding, for example, the data sparsity in the continent and the danger that presents to the rest of the world in terms of, for example, training the models for climate change predictions and the like. There is also other issues, including, for example, lack of data for training artificial intelligence models that have got societal implications. Africa does recognize that there is potential in using science and technology to address some of these challenges. Hence, you see that there is the African Science and Technology Policy that clearly articulates how we can proceed in that direction. The session talks about digital transformation. Africa does have a digital transformation strategy that talks to a digital economy in the continent. And more profoundly, there is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that talks of how we can trade amongst ourselves in the continent. It's a huge continent, as you saw. This has got great, great implications for the continent and for the globe. And I think regarding the challenges that I just shown, science diplomacy will play a role. And these are some of the definitions that you'll see regarding what science diplomacy is. And I think research infrastructures are an example of how to use science diplomacy to really address some of these common challenges. So I put those definitions there just to sensitize us of the bigger picture of how RIs really play a role in terms of science diplomacy. And indeed, one maybe can then go further and talk about open science diplomacy, whereupon, of course, there are advantages that you see there. And at the very core of open science is the issue of societal engagement and public disclosure. And I think this is critical. Scientists must think about how they frame their problems and how they lend with society. Very, very critical to make sure that what we do as scientists provides that return on investment to society. And indeed, the conversation that was sparked by the last question regarding how do we engage transboundary, there is a trajectory in terms of developing open science platforms. We heard about the Global Open Science Cloud that has just had an IPO office launched. Indeed, there is a conference in Leiden that I'm going to after this regarding the Fair Convergence Symposium. On the sidelines, there's a meeting of executives of Open Science Clouds who will discuss some of the issues that were discussed here. And of course, Europe has made very good strides regarding European Open Science Cloud. And underneath all this is the issue of developing the requisite cyber infrastructure ecosystem. You'll see there on the diagram that I provided there. And this is very, very critical because countries that have done this have seen gains in terms of improved collaborations, as you can see there on the network graph of Europe and the US, and on a very sparse graph of collaborations in the continent. And of course, in terms of the guidance, there's multilateral organizations like the UN that I think we still have hope in, and they've provided some guidelines with inputs from all the countries in the world, including Africa, regarding what open science is and what it needs to do and what are the responsibilities of the various stakeholders. And I think UNESCO is also now providing a toolkit for operationalizing the UNESCO Open Science recommendations. And indeed, African countries themselves, when they caucus in various fora, including recently at the African Regional Forum for Sustainable Development, endorsed the operationalization of the UNESCO Open Science recommendations. And in tandem with that, we have the UNESCO artificial intelligence recommendations as well. And of course, there are parallels. You cannot talk about AI without talking about data, in terms of the data that you collect, how you use it responsibly, etc., etc. So African countries, through the various forums, have also provided inputs into the development, and indeed they are espousing to implement these recommendations. In terms of the imperatives for Africa, and indeed for the rest of the world regarding what I've just discussed, Africa needs to enhance its ecosystems to be fit for purpose. We need to enhance those intra-African collaborations, and we need to move from dislocated projects to programs that are of impact. And indeed, the issue of societal impact has just been pronounced. We can see open science is providing an impetus to furthering all this. I think the issue of impact is critical, and you cannot talk about impact without defining the necessary indicators. I don't know how many countries have really defined societal impact through, for example, open science. But I think for us it's quite critical, and if you look at impact, you've got to look at its dimensions. How is open science, for example, in changing attitudes, improving economies, improving the environment, influencing policy formulation? So things that needs to be looked at. The issue of access to knowledge in the digital era is very, very paramount. I think there was a one-word summary yesterday from a colleague from Australia, equity. Equitable access to knowledge is something that we cannot avoid in the 21st century, and how can Africa also share and shape that dialogue regarding democratization of science and new models of publishing. And indeed, Chairman, the issue was about data, and I thought I should just sort of provide a slide to highlight issues with data. People are talking about open data. That is a bit scary, opening up everything. You can open up what you can open up what is necessary, and you can keep close to what you must. So the notion now is that of fair data with all these dimensions that we know about. The bottom line is that we all know we are thirsty in a sea of data. How do we organize ourselves to be able to do that? Data is indeed the elephant in the room. In terms of Africa, for example, the issue of open government data will be very, very critical. In terms of improving governance, open data or fair data will be very critical regarding digital transformation. And I think it's also critical to say that open data does increase citizen participation. So let's not forget the citizenry when dealing with these things. Data sovereignty. With the European Union allow companies to hold European data, European personal data in other jurisdictions, for example. I think these are very tricky challenges that we all need to look at. The data values, there's a very interesting project in the continent regarding data values, looking at data as a route to inclusion and equity. And of course, we need data that is well governed and data that powers sustainable development. Let's not forget the citizen as well. A participation of a citizen in terms of a citizen who's data literate, even more so, for example, in the continent. Do citizens know about how their data is used, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm providing references to some of the projects that I think also provides input regarding what we're talking about. Now, if we can get all this right, the possibilities are boundless for the continent. We know that Africa is a very rich, intensive, resource-rich continent. We know that Africa is very young. We know that there is great science that can be done in the continent. We know the biodiversity that Africa maintains. I was just talking to colleagues when I registered. They showed me the Czech tea that we all have in our bags. And I was telling them that I know of such teas in Africa. I think there are probably 5,000 varieties of these teas. Are we packaging them? Are we looking at them and looking what's inside them and then maybe exporting them to the world to be enjoyed in Borno or anywhere else? So there is potential, and it's a low-hanging fruit. So really, I'm building up to what we are trying to do at the continent. There was obviously a thought some years ago about looking where Africa is regarding open science. And a detailed landscape study was conducted in terms of the capacities and activities in the continent. Such a report has been shared post the landscape study. You'll see there that various countries are at different stages. Not surprising, given the diversity we talked about. We had presentations from South Africa about the very, very good work they are doing, including having a national infrastructure roadmap. Not very many countries in the continent have that. So indeed, you can see the disparity given the scale. And also the connectivity issues. We're very grateful to the European Union regarding projects to help connect Africa. And indeed, for the next phase of the things you are talking about, this collaboration will be very critical. So I was building up to what we are trying to do. Starting this year, a strategy was developed post-landscape study to say, where do we need to go? So I'm coming here today to look for partnerships to help us implement the strategy. I apologize for the marketing tantra, but it's very important. Starting this year in January, with my appointment as the inaugural director for the African Open Science Platform, we are hitting the ground running. We are operationalizing the African Open Science Platform with all its grandeur, but being pragmatic to start somewhere, starting small to make sure that we can do some of the things that I talked about. But those are the elements. We all agree that we need the infrastructure. There is a trend where African scientists are in the diaspora, not because they want to be here purely, but because they're frustrated, because they don't have infrastructure to do the science that they've been trained to do. We need to keep them in the continent to do things. The issue of a data science and AI institutes, that is obviously cutting across institutions in the continent. And more importantly, the issue of collaborative projects across domains, projects that will allow us to create the necessary critical masses to be able to have the necessary impact at a continental level. And then those two networks, networks of education and skills, and the networks of open access and dialogue to make sure that we can have the necessary collisions between the stakeholders to frame scientific problems. Very, very quickly, we do have a value proposition that we want to share with stakeholders to see how they can plug in. We've identified who the stakeholders are, and we've provided what AOSP can offer in terms of the landscape. And the benefits across the various actors. Maybe I haven't included research infrastructures there, but they are a very, very important stakeholder, for example, also through the NREN. So really, this is something that we are very, very keen to share. And in terms of the operationalization of the strategy and its element, I just want to share those with you. It's a long presentation if I were to do that, but briefly, those are the key areas that we are unpacking as we start at this year, 2022, going forward. And a very, very quick update in terms of where we are. We want to have a fresher, updated view of what is happening across that very big continent, given that there was landscape study done some time ago. We are positioning ourselves, which is why I'm here today, on the bandwagon of AOSP. We want to develop a very robust monitoring and evaluation framework to be able to talk to the impact and how AOSP is performing. We are in the process of establishing regional nodes. The operationalization model operational model of AOSP will see us having different nodes in the various regions. Each of the nodes may be looking to push each of the strands that you see there, and there will be cross-fertilization of ideas and best practices between the nodes. And we are looking to establish a governing council, this to take over from the advisory council that was there in the pilot phase of the project. The social mobilization is key for us. We are aligning ourselves with the donors and the funders, and already existing science granting council initiative in the continent. And we are leveraging networks already in various countries that are pushing for the open science agenda. And very, very importantly, we are looking at key application programs that will allow us to work together in the continent. Mr. Chair, let me very quickly say that there is a lot of activity in the various regions already. For example, there in SADC, you will see the very good work done through the SADC Cyber Infrastructure Framework, which I was involved some years ago. There's very good synergies with AOSP. And indeed, all those strategies that you see there talk to the use of infrastructure and science for solving problems. I think you see some people taking pictures. Can go back a little bit. Maybe they can collaborate. There's a policy stack of strategies in various regions that are happening. And indeed, SADC, for example, has got an infrastructure vision 2027. It talks of digital SADC 2027. Somebody mentioned cybersecurity. All these things were articulated. They do talk indirectly to the African Open Science Platform. And if you were to go to any of these regional economic bodies and delve into their policies, indeed, African Open Science Platform is invited as they unpack their strategies. We want to be in there as and when they prioritize their projects so that we can obviously be relevant. And in terms of concrete infrastructure, I think we've had very, very good presentations about very, very big ecosystems. Universities in Africa do not have high-performance computing facilities. As a computer scientist who studied in London for many, many years, I go back to Africa, I'm thinking, I know these things are possible. How can I make the necessary relationship to equip and facilitate ecosystems around high-performance computing and modeling? Very good scientists who are working on their laptops to do things. Now, these are very impactful projects, and there has been a project to try to equip campuses, at least in some countries, with small HPC systems to help researchers doing data-intensive work. This is through the assistance of the South African National Integrated Cyber Infrastructure Ecosystem in the HPC facility, with relationships with the University of Texas Advanced Computing Center. Very, very grateful for the past, I would say, since 2014, through evolutions of some of this. These are intangible things that we can already do. We've had a relationship with ICTP in Trieste. I've been to Trieste a number of times regarding human capital in terms of data centers for academic institutions. I think this is critical. And of course, without necessarily look at all the regions, there's good work also done in West Africa regarding similar things. So ASP wants to align with all these activities in terms of the implementation of what we need to do. Very, very critical, Mr. Chair, that at the countries themselves, we talked about digital transformation. Countries must have digital transformation strategies that obviously articulates the value of digital transformation within the countries themselves, but also links to the African Union digital transformation strategy. Maybe I'm biased because I'm original from Botswana. Botswana does have a strategy that is being implemented. Implementation requires partnerships, and indeed there is progress. World Bank has done some good work in terms of the baseline work, seeing the data about the various pillars of the digital economy. Mr. Chair, very quickly, very few last slides. The main thing is projects. There are some areas where already in the continent we can have meaningful, impactful projects. Africa does have an African Space Agency statutes, space agency policies, space science policies are being developed in various parts of the country. And there's pockets of excellence in the continent, including in South Africa through the South African SANSA. And indeed, use cases are abound regarding space sciences. Biodiversity, we talked about it. Ecology and preservation of the ecosystems that are transboundary. Elephants without borders, they don't respect borders, but they also influence people's lives. These projects, you see maybe satellite imagery and working with experts on the ground provides us with good information. Botswana is host to a World Heritage Site called the Okavango Delta, the biggest inland delta in the world with a very rich diversity. They are the custodians of that resource, and indeed science through open science and open data is very, very critical. Genomics, we saw how big Africa is. Linguistically, one country, Zambia, has got 73 languages. That implies genetic diversity as well. Do we understand enough about African genomics, genetic diversity, and how can we bring that to the fore in terms of research? African Open Science Platform is aligned with the project there that is funded by the American NIH regarding genomics, and we think this can have a continental impact. The issue of climate and weather, Dr. Bopapi yesterday was standing here talking about, as a meteorologist, talking about the issues regarding weather prediction and the pipeline that is required. Indeed, there was a project that I was personally involved in regarding the use of the SADC cyber infrastructure to try to engage meteorological offices and universities and that HPC ecosystem to get us to do things. Finally, Mr. Chair, I thank you for indulgence, but the ASP is also very keen to engage in dialogue like I was here, I am here. We are engaging in dialogue in the World Science Forum through sessions that we're preparing there. South Africa will be hosting the International Data Week 2027 after Botswana hosted the International Data Week 2018. Next 2 weeks, we are hosting the Conference on Research, National Research and Education Network, which I invite all of you to join. And hopefully the organizers of the conference will see it fit. Maybe the next few years we want to see ICRI in the continent. You saw the pictures. There's a very good venue sites that you can go to, including the Okavango. But finally, Chair, these are the slides that I wanted to end with. We want to stimulate interactivity in the continent. We want to create efficiencies of scale. We want to build critical mass through shared capacities. And we want to maximize impact through commonality of purpose and voice. And we also want to plug into the global commons as a continent that comes to the party to help shape the development of the solutions to the problem. I think UNESCO Open Science recommendations are critical. I also want to say that we want to be pragmatic. There's no shortage of very grand ideas that has now been implemented. So we'll be taking incremental pragmatic steps as we go along. Thank you very much for indulgence.
Thank you so much, Dr. MOTSHEGWA, Tshiamo. We have time for one question from the room. Yes, please. He's running.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. I was wondering, I mean, some of the slides already gave some indication about that, but how do you see the role and the value of the regional research and education networks like Ubuntu Net Alliance and RIKEN and also ASREN? And another subsidiary question, are you going to participate in Accra at the Geo Plenary? Just curiosity, thank you.
You're right, I mean, it's a very, very important question. In fact, we are developing an MOU with the Ubuntu Net Alliance, and indeed you saw there the presentation. Those two slides were from WACREN. I think the NRENs are critical. They have been largely focusing on connectivity for the past number of years, as you know. But now NRENs need to elevate their game, and they are elevating their game to develop, for example, data centers. I think the Africa Connect 3 projects provide a window of opportunity for some NRENs that are now maybe level up in terms of maturity to be looking at advanced data services. But I can count very, very few NRENs that have got data centers, for example. So I think NRENs are key. They already have got a community, which is why as AOSP we are aligning very close with them. You saw there the conference I mentioned that is coming to Botswana. I personally went to the conference last year in Zambia and lobbied for that conference to come to that country, Botswana, because they are starting a new NREN. So the conversations there can also help them start it. So really it's very critical when we attend all the conferences for the NRENs, and I think last year we were in the WACREN conference virtually, and we're very, very keen to also engage others. So really it's a pertinent question. With ASP we want to link the networks, we want to engage all the stakeholders to make sure that we have the necessary impact that we require. But yes, definitely.
Thank you so much, and also for coming from so far away.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let me invite to the stage the last speaker, Dr. Michihiko MINOH, who will tell us about how he sees the benefits and challenges of international cooperation in the field of data, and in particular about the difficulties on one hand to have a general setup of the research infrastructures, and at the same time seeing the challenges in the different fields that need to be served. Please.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is MINOH from RIKEN, Japan. And the concept that RI is very broad in this conference. But for me, from the information scientist, it means that's just like the ICT research infrastructure, very narrow vision of that kind of things. But it's a very powerful tool for collaborating the worldwide. So I'd like to talk about that. First, let me consider the process of the researchers. So the research process is fast. The researcher get idea, they can make a research plan, and after that, they do the experiment, and after that, write a paper and submit the paper data. So we wanted to support all the process that the researcher doing this. So first part, we are providing a journal access, online journal or e-journal access for the from the institution. And main part we do not support at all. Usually the IT division support the researchers by providing the computational facility only. So I would like to provide the data management facility for the researchers. So that is our project now proceeding. And after that, we would provide the research evidence data repository and paper and article repository. And at the same time, we provide database of research biologies, bibliographies. So we set up these working strategy for researchers. This is an optional one. Usually the researcher can have this kind of strategy by buying their workstations or something like that. But in order to governance the whole research process, the researchers should use this storage provided by the institution, because it is a proof of evidence that the research process is correctly performed. So we wanted to provide these kind of repositories and try to governance, data governance of the researchers to protect them. And at the same time, what kind of research data appear in the research process? Usually, they get a measurement of the observation, and they get the initial research data, and they process that by general pre-processing, removing the noise and removing the characteristics of the instrument. Out of that, we get the research target data. This is very useful for the other researchers to use. And the research proceed to using the research target data and put the many processes for research. And sometimes they are feedback to get another data of the research target data. And so we have a lot of research target data. And after that, final result could be produced. And this could be called research evidence data. This was attached to the papers. So we can add the metadata by using the AI, particularly the natural language processing. So to open the final research data is relatively easy because we have an article or a paper that explains the data in detail. So we want to focus on more research target data have to be open to share it in the community. And the research style is historically the hypothesis-driven research. So the researchers can get the inspiration of hypotheses, and based on that, they are doing the experiment and get the data from that experiment. Nowadays, there are a lot of data, related data in the internet. So the researcher access the internet data and integrate the data to promote the research. I asked several researchers in RIKEN now how much data you are getting from the internet to promote your research. The answer is terrible. They say it's less than 5% or so. So almost all the data the researchers can generate by themselves. They don't use open data at all. So that is the situation. So the researcher promoted research and the digital data, and the research evidence data back to the open data. And we wanted to this research style change to the data-driven researches. So the student has researcher has an inspiration and access the public share data, and to do some of the analysis or experiment and to get the final result. But sometimes they need to verify that result by doing the experiment. So I think this kind of data-driven research is important to use the open shared research data. So we wanted to promote this research style in our institution. So considering these processes, we set up the RIKEN data policies. And this RIKEN has a lot of research field, such as psychology, physics, and chemical, and life science and information. So we can't define what the research data is. So we define the research data is all kind of data acquired or generated through the research at the institution. This is the research data. But we want to manage the only small part of the data that is called useful data. And so this repository, the institution is responsible for managing its repository. So we have 3 boxes. One is the fully open data, and the second is the limited access data for collaboration among the internal and the external researchers of our institution. And the third part is a very restricted research data that is a kind of secret, or including the personal data, or including the intellectual property data. So we set up these kind of things and manage these repositories. The main point is how long the institute manage the research data, open research data. That is the problem. We temporarily set up, its time is 10 years, and we will be investigating the access log of the open research data and try to delete it, hopefully. So this is a kind of strategy, data policy we set up at RIKEN. And for the researchers of a research project, that can include the researchers outside of RIKEN, including the overseas researchers. And they can access these kind of 3 repositories. And the real repository with the cloud storage, or some of the on-prem cloud storage with the computational facilities. And these 3 database, the bibliographic database, and the paper and article repository, and the research repositories were connected by the metadatabase. This was a tool for retrieval of the research data. And we'll provide these kind of things for the researchers. So each researcher can use this. And all research processes may be recorded by our systems, and the researcher can advantage to show the proof of the research process is very good, is correct, or something like that. This is a very, I think it's important facility to provide the institution for the researchers, because we have to protect our researchers in some sense. And as a metadata, this is a type of metadata we are considering, and catalog data, research activity data, and research knowledge data. So we are collecting and integrating these kind of metadata, and we got a knowledge organization. This is the knowledge for each communities, and in integrating these metadata together, we get the knowledge of humans, hopefully. So now we are mainly focused on the life science, and integrated the metadata like this. For example, if we got a mice, and in that case, the many research centers can use the mouse. So in that case, all the image obtained several centers are integrated together and to sharing the researches inside the RIKEN. This platform will be open to the public, and maybe it promotes the collaboration among the different research areas. And the IoT device is also necessary. We will provide edge processing for the IoT devices. For example, if the microscopic data is measured, in that case, the image data obtained by the microscope is tested by AI. The AI evaluates the quality of image, and if it's not satisfied for further analysis, in that case, the AI automatically changes the parameter of the measurement and try to recapturing the image until the AI satisfied the quality of the data. And in that case, in this case, a part of metadata will automatically attach the image data, just like the parameters of the instrument or other things. But we can't attach the metadata for the object, which is measured. That is prepared by the researchers. So the researchers have to do to be at the metadata. And we are now collecting these technologies, and we're now making a RIKEN open life science platform. So the lowest part is the data generations, which has a capability of the IoT and edge processing, and the middle part is the repositories and the data integration of the facilities. And using the Japanese developed research data management system developed by NII of Japan, we are using these kind of research management systems and the research data search and the research data publication systems provided by NII. And using this, there are many researchers in various fields can access the data through the metadata retrieval. So the researchers have to be data-driven research, hopefully. And this is the kind of the Japanese research data management system developed by NII Japan. So they are developing the RDM platform and the research data repository and publication platform and the discovery platform. And using this, the main function is provided. It is a data governance based on the data management plan and the security analysis and the curation of the data based on the fair combination. And the Japanese research infrastructure project is started 2022, and this project is using the NII's research data management systems as a central role. So each university in Japan can use the system provided by NII, or if the big university wanted to set up their own research data management system, in that case, the NII delivered the source code of the research data management system. So maybe I hope that this is a kind of open source project for research data management systems and used all over Japan, it is a very good basis of sharing data all over Japan. I hope it could be expanded to the internationalized, international use. I hope. And the problem of the remains of the future is the evaluation of the data sharing of activities is very important to be the sustainable project. So how to evaluate this project is very important. It's a very big program for us to continue this project. And next is maybe the constructing the system itself is relatively easy, but the most difficult things and time-consuming things is motivate researchers to share their research data. That is a very difficult problem to further proceed the open science protocol. And for international collaboration, it is important to standardize data formats and metadata. And for the collaboration internationally, I think that the authentication system and authorization system is important. So we have to discuss the federation of these kind of systems in worldwide. It will be necessary. In that case, we can easily collaborate each other from the viewpoint of the information science scientist. And nowadays I noticed that unfortunately there exist some researchers who take all the data from our open database. It is legally admitted, but I feel something strange to me. How do we cope with that kind of researchers? That's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. MINOH. We can take one question from the room, if any. Yes, there's one there.
So I was going to make this point at the end of the last talk, but it fits much, much better at the end of this one. The previous speaker mentioned, for example, incentives, and you talked about governance and all the things for encouraging researchers. But as well as understanding incentives for open science and data, we have to understand disincentives. And one of the main disincentives is people worrying they're going to be proved wrong, particularly for data and their analysis being made available. And Hanifeh said at the previous talk, it's okay to fail. We also have to develop a culture where it's okay to be wrong, right? And sometimes the wrong data will be an outlier, and sometimes the wrong data will be a new discovery. And you'd indicated, for example, using AI systems close to the measurement to actually start assessing the quality of data and so on. So there's all those things we have to build in to improve, to take away the disincentives. But we have to understand the disincentives. They're really very big.
Thank you so much. That is, I think, that's important. So maybe the data used in a fair way, fair use way, that is not a problem. But I don't know how the data used, how does our data used in practical case. That could be a kind of worry what I have now. So maybe I don't mind that kind of problem at all. It could be good for us to do so. But in moral, in culture, mind makes me angry to do such kind of things. That's good.
Thank you so much. I would like to spend the last 5 minutes that we don't have left of the session, but 5 minutes into the coffee break to invite the other two panelists on stage. And if we can have Hanifeh also on the screen. So please, Doctor, if you can still, and since we only have 5 minutes, we can stand, all of us, which makes the last remarks from you shorter, I hope. So please stand in front, I think would be nice. So I think, although we didn't have a real discussion, I must say, the different presentations, the different questions and answers really came around all the questions that we had raised before the session, talking both about technological challenges, both in terms of capacities, in terms of skills development, and also the non-technological challenges. We heard issues of legal compatibility, we heard issues of research security, data security, we heard issues of governance, even extended to science diplomacy, which was also a very, very relevant point. So having heard all that, any final remarks from you as a panelist? And I would like to start with Hanifeh from Sweden.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think my final remark is really that, you know, we have to be optimistic and we have to try. We have to collaborate more, and we have to realize that, you know, research is in many ways, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of activity. If you share your data and make my research better, I will share my data and make your research better. We constantly build on each other's findings anyway, so it's not really something strange. We just have to come up with approaches and ways. And I think I said it in my talk as well, bottom-up approach usually works. We have to find areas where we see that data sharing is very beneficial, and start with the low-hanging fruits and get the researchers to enable them really to share, because they really want to do it. And that's what we do in many of the research infrastructures anyway. We share data. So just incentivize those who are already there and eager and want to share. And then I think the rest will gradually follow. We have to be patient.
Thank you. Thank you. Tshiamo, 1 minute from you.
You know, how my 1 minute could be 10 minutes. I think this is a pertinent discussion. I think sharing and disclosure is at the core of scientific integrity. If we are struggling with that, then we have a problem in terms of the integrity of science. So it should be a default position, really. And I think as a computer scientist, I remember the first time when a young computer scientist called Linus Torvalds released the Linux kernel after studying the work of Professor Teinbaum on the MINOH operating system. Fast forward 20, 30 years, where are we? The large HPC facilities run Linux. There's a large open source community that we all benefit from. So really, the open source community have shown us why it's very, very important to take the default position to share, notwithstanding the necessary restrictions we may have. For research that is funded by the public purse, there must be a prerogative to default share the data. And one last point, I think it's critical, as we saw in the last panels, that we can go a long way together. We must encourage north-south collaborations to make sure that we have the necessary observation networks to make sure that the future that we want, that is driven by AI and by models, are fed complete data, clean data that we all need, that we have to collect on the ground around the continents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. MINOH.
Well, I think the most important thing is how to decrease the researcher's burden to share the data. So that is a very important aspect for me to motivate the researcher to share the data. So I think the IT department have to be collaborate internationally and maybe do an open source project for the research data management system or any other system which is useful for sharing the data is very important to promote. And in addition to that, we need to federate the authentication in the authorization system in the community. Is very important to promote that kind of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Thomas.
Thank you very much. I think In the context of digital twins, it's not only important to share the data, but also to share your models and also to share your interfaces and expose your interfaces to other digital twin developers. I think that is in addition to the remarks about sharing data, that is really important. I think the last thing, what's also really important, is that you open up your development process as well, so that everybody, especially in the context of digital twins, where we have to build trust in these digital twins, that also the process how these digital twins are being developed and being built is open and clear and transparent.
Thank you. I would like to thank again all the panelists. Thank you also the audience for being here, and apologies for cutting into your coffee break. Thank you.